then. Well, fascinating to see in the newspaper today that a majority of voters back under-30s migration in a Brexit reset. This is the British public backing closer relations with the EU 5 years after the UK left. Of course, the anniversary was yesterday. Wanting the government to sign up to a new migration scheme for young people. This is a poll for the iPaper by BMG Research, marking half a decade since Brexit took place, indicating more people would support rejoining the EU than want to stay out. Now, that conflicts with some of the other polling that we were talking to Professor Sir John Curtis about yesterday at a Friday drive, as you may know, between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Most voters back the Prime Minister's decision to launch a reset of relations with Brussels. A quarter say it is moving too slowly. 36% of people want to quit the European Convention on Human Rights, up from 26% at the general election. 45% are opposed. Well, let's get the thoughts of Lance Forman. He's a former Brexit MEP, he's a businessman as well, and Peter Wilding is the chairman of British Influence. Well, Lance, let's start with you. Has Brexit worked for you? Has it worked for this country, do you think? Is it everything that you thought it would be?
What I would say, Peter, is that it's a work in progress. You know, if you remember, leading up to the referendum, the Remain campaign was saying that this was going to be the worst thing that's ever going to happen to Britain. The economy would completely collapse, massive unemployment. You know, they threatened everything. The sun would, well, it's not shining today actually, and the grass wouldn't grow. It's just going to be a total catastrophe, and that just hasn't happened. In fact, our economy has performed. It hasn't performed well, but it's performed better than Germany, the biggest economy in the EU. So on the negative, that never really happened. But the Brexit campaigners were also saying this would be very good for the economy and it would be good for the future of Britain. And I would say that hasn't really happened yet either. But we have the opportunity for growth. We've sort of worked out how to unlock the door to leave the EU, but we just haven't left the room yet. So we're still faced with, you know, pretty much all of their regulations. We have done some positive things. We've joined the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we couldn't have done in the EU, and that free trade agreement is you know, is pretty much as big as the EU itself. You know, if you take all the countries involved in their GDPs. Yesterday, we heard from Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump said that you know, the EU has treated us very badly, and we're going to impose tariffs. Well, we're not in the EU anymore, so we have an opportunity to trade with our biggest. You know, the USA is actually our biggest trade partner, and there's some great opportunities if we seize them. We have to look at the opportunities and seize them if we want to do well with this.
Is this just about seizing opportunities, Peter Wilding? Peter is the chairman of British Influence. Is this just about things we haven't done yet, rather than what has happened so far within the last 5 years, Peter?
Because we, after the referendum,
Peter Wilding, are you with us? I think it's not a great line. Let's try one more time. Peter, can you hear me? No, we haven't got Peter. We'll try and get him back. Peter Wilding is the chairman of British Influence. Lance, perhaps I can go back to you, because Nigel Farage has said in the last few days that he is the person to properly deliver Brexit. I mean, how much longer do you think politicians can actually say, look, it's really about what could be rather than what has been? And actually, is 5 years long enough to properly evaluate something, especially such a huge constitutional change?
Well, it's sad that we haven't really taken advantage of it. But I think one of the things we learnt was that, you know, there were so many complaints about EU regulations and, you know, the EU Commission, all the bureaucracy. When we left the EU, what we found was that our own civil service was, you know, we were gold-plating a lot of these regulations. We were just as bad ourselves. And what we need to do is we need to change the entire mindset. And that's something that's just not going to happen overnight. My hope is that what the Americans are now doing with DOGE, and you know, massively stripping back on regulations, which will free up the economy to grow. My hope is that we'll be watching them very closely and thinking, we should be doing this too, and we have the ability to do it now. You know, I think there's something only like about 15% of UK businesses actually trade with the EU. Why should they face EU regulations, which they still do? There's no need for it. Small businesses should not be facing all the sort of EU rules. That's what makes us unproductive as a country. It's the massive bureaucracy. I know this because
I mean, the Labour
business.
government has added a lot more bureaucracy and a lot more regulation within the last few months. Let me just give you a sense of what our viewers and listeners are saying. Sean in Gloucester says, how on earth can Brexit be a success when the vast majority of those in power never wanted it and are so against it? They've deliberately scuppered it to prove that people were wrong. And they knew better all along. They do well to remember who pays their wages and votes them in. Sean in Newton Abbot in Devon says, with reference to Brexit, I voted out and I would vote out again tomorrow. I will vote out again next year. I will always vote out. Yep, everyone keeps missing the point. Brexit would work. It's not that it's not working, it's the people behind it not implementing it correctly. Had it to be done by Brexiteers who actually wanted to leave, not people like Labour and the Tories who actually didn't, then it would have worked. In short, put someone in charge who actually wants to leave, and then we'll get the results they need. Peter Wilding, we've established contact by phone. I want to make sure you have your say, Peter. Is this a sense of perhaps the opportunities not being realised?
Thanks very much for waiting for me. We had two types of Brexit we could have chosen after the referendum. You might remember the hard Brexit option and the soft Brexit option. We had a choice then, and we chose the toughest option, the hard Brexit, where we were out of the single market with customs union. That meant the onus was on Britain to choose a way forward, and we've tried all three. There were three Brexit, essentially, the Liz Truss Brexit to turn the UK into a Singapore-on-Thames. That failed. The Boris Johnson Brexit, which was basically a nationalist Brexit, levelling up, pull up the barriers. And finally, there was the Theresa May option, which was trying to make a deal which minimised the damage. So we've tried everything. And the problem we have is we're stuck with a system which makes Britain poorer, weaker, and smaller. Poorer, as everybody knows, because of the trade problems. Weaker because, the way we show power in the world is to sit on the top tables of great international institutions. We're out of it. And smaller because Northern Ireland is part of the EU economy. So this is always up, a bad deal. There's no way of getting it better, and we are just effectively in a hard Brexit doom loop at the moment.
But surely there are opportunities that we wouldn't have had previously in regard to the pandemic, in regard to trade with America, in regard to trade with other countries as well, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that just wouldn't have happened had we remained within the EU, Peter.
True, but it's like saying, we're going into a footy match, we're going to be 5-0 down at the start, and let's have this, one goal back. Of course, there are minor opportunities, but they are not outweighed by what we have sacrificed by being part of the biggest single market in the world and the power.
We're still trading with the EU, though, aren't we? I mean, it's not as if they've cut themselves off completely.
Well, it's plain that we are 15% down. We've lost £100 billion worth of trade each year. That costs each and every one of us a lot of money because that's 40 billion tax take, which has just been thrown away. So yes, there are bits which are good, but the overall picture is bad. I mean, small business have been crucified. People can't, the cost of sending packages to Europe. I mean, tiny little niggly things like that were not necessary. They have been imposed upon us, and they have prevented trade. So, that's the basic deal where we sit. We've been waiting. You mentioned two things here: the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 0.08% increase in trade.
Lance, we are poorer, we are weaker, and we are smaller, according to Peter Wilding. What do you make of what he has said?
Well, I completely disagree. I think people have also got to put Brexit into perspective. It is our entire economy is not just about Brexit and trade with the EU. And in fact, I remember, in the year before we left, there was a massive argument about the exit fee, this £39 billion we were going to have to pay to leave the EU. And then immediately we did leave, COVID came along, and we were spending £50 billion every month on furlough and getting people to stay at home. So, the costs of exiting, I think that, you have to put them into perspective. The opportunities are great now that we have our independence. And we have to take advantage of that. That's what people voted for. When people voted for Brexit, yes, they had, some people were concerned about immigration, some about sovereignty, some about, regulations. But ultimately, what people voted for is change. They didn't like the way things were being done. They were threatened that this will be a disaster. Politicians from across the board said this is a huge mistake, and yet people defied that. They didn't like what the political class and the establishment were telling them. They wanted change, and I think it's seeing a very similar pattern in America now. People are now getting the change, and I think it's showing what is possible here. And it'll be, I think we'll be watching very, very closely to see what happens in the USA. It's a fast-growing economy. We have that opportunity too.